what I wanted us to have a chance to think about is the future of Jewish life, particularly the future of Jewish life in North America, particularly the future of Jewish life in the United States. And I want to start by reminding you that the Talmud says that prophecy has been taken away from the prophets and it has been given to children and to fools. And I am no child. So, anyone who tells you that they know where things are headed is lying. The annoying thing about the future is it keeps being unpredictable. In the year 1900, nobody would have predicted any of the major features of the 21st century. None. You read all of the predictions of how that century was going to proceed, not one of them are worth the print they were printed on. Nobody saw the women's movement. No one saw World War I or II. No one saw the Holocaust. No one expected the State of Israel. No one expected the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement. No one expected Stonewall and gay liberation. It turns out everything interesting that happened was a complete surprise. And yet we continue to think, well, let's figure out, based on everything we know, where we think it's likely to be headed. So the essential thing wrong with that exercise, and we're going to do it anyway, the essential thing wrong is that it posits, without ever saying it, assuming everything stays the same. Every single prediction has that assumption in it, assuming nothing changes, which of course is completely wrong. So I personally don't bother reading news articles predicting where things are headed. They have no clue. You should save a lot of time by no longer reading those, and if you're one of the people who writes them, please stop. And that having been said, I want to talk to you about the future of Jewish life. And to do that, I'm going to talk about the past of Jewish life. So I want to go into the distant past for a moment and point out to you that in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, there is no word for religion. Judaism wasn't a religion in antiquity. It was the essence of the Jewish people. But we don't have the ability to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God, because we think Caesar belongs to God. There's no separation in Jewish culture. Which is to say, if there's nothing that's not religion, then nothing is religion either. Goes together. We became a religion because they discovered religion. Religion is a Latin word, religio, meaning to bind, to tie. And it's up to the Romans, who came up with aqueducts and very cool sandals and a high level of dictatorship. And for those of you who studied Latin, serious run-on sentences. The Romans came up with religion because they had to try to decide which ones were legita, legitimate, and which were not. And as in the wine business, old was better. So if you could prove to the Romans that your religion was very, very old, then that made it a legitimate religion, which is why we enjoyed the Colosseum a lot more than our Christian brothers and sisters, who ended up being catnip in that gathering. By the way, there's been recent archaeological evidence, I'm not joking here, there's recent archaeological evidence that much of the funding for the Colosseum came from the spoils taken from the temple. When the Romans took our temple away from us, there was a lot of gold and tchotchkes in the basement, and that was used to fund the building of the Colosseum. So the next time you visit, you should just like carve your name into some part of the wall or something. So we became a religion because it fit a Roman legal category. And then eventually Christianity became a legitimate religion under Roman law, and I hear they've done pretty well. Islam stepped in around the year 500-600, and it also saw itself as a religion. The dominant feature of the medieval period was there was no such thing as citizenship, and who you were was defined pretty rigidly by your religion and your gender, which meant that that's the point at which Jews decided, since everyone else had one, we should get ourselves one of these religions too. And Judaism became one. And during the entire time of our exile, the primary way Jews thought about their Jewishness was in contrast to Christianity, which is a theologically driven creedal religion, and Islam, which is a theologically driven creedal religion. That is to say, it has a creed. You can say in one sentence what being a Muslim means. We've tried very hard to fit into that mold. We try really hard to look like a religion and sound like a religion, even though none of you actually think we're a religion. I'll just prove that to you. If I tell you that Judaism tells you you have to do something a certain way, will you all do it? One of the ways that you renew your control over Judaism as not a religion is every year at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when the rabbi tells you you don't have to be clergy to bow all the way to the ground, so please join me. Come on up here or stand around the open spaces. Feel free to bow all the way to the ground. And I know what you do. When your rabbi says, you nod very nicely, as if there's a shot in hell that that's going to happen. And the minute the rabbi turns around, you're back to normal. That happens in the synagogue I lead for the holidays too. It's not a religion. It's barely a people, right? But that dynamic carried us for good and ill. It was a great and brilliant adaptation that allowed us to be understood by our neighbors. And it allowed us to understand ourselves. In a context in which everyone was defined by their religion, we had one too. And that starts to fall apart in modernity. The modern era is characterized by a couple great shifts. The first is the rise of national citizenship. You're no longer under the feudal control of the Count so-and-so, a Catholic, and a tradesman. Suddenly, you are a citizen of France. And the idea develops haltingly and with great resistance to this day that the law should apply equally to all citizens, regardless of any other label that they have. I'm not claiming that democracy has attained that goal. But even in the violation of that goal, democracies assert that that is what they're about. So That created for the Jews an opportunity and a crisis. Because if you can be who you are and be a member of society, and all of a sudden rabbis have no ability to legislate your identity, no ability to impose behavioral norms on you, well, Judaism has never known such a thing. There was never a time where Jews were completely free of religious authority. The Torah was the constitution of ancient Israel. Its laws were the laws of ancient Israel. In the medieval period, what I like to think of as the good old days, other than the pogroms and the Inquisition, which I'll hand you were not as fun as they sound. In the good old days, I could send a big burly guy to your home, pound on the door, and make you come to Shacharit. These were days in which attendance was not a problem. But with the rise of the Enlightenment, Jews developed the capacity to choose whether they want to be Jewish, how they want to be Jewish, even incompatibly how they want to be Jewish sometimes, but not consistently. All of that rises with the shift to the modern world. And America is preeminently the center of an Enlightenment experiment, meaning we don't have a prehistory. I mean, Native Americans do, but all of us who came on a boat, voluntary or involuntary, we came here to a country that was self-professing an Enlightenment ideal. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that all are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. No one in the Middle Ages would have known what any of that meant. Every American learns that in grade school. So the Jews who came to America, the first batch of Jews, by which I mean the first 100 years, they came because America wasn't the old world. They were tired of getting clobbered, they were tired of getting murdered and raped, and they were tired of forcible conversions. They also were tired of starving. And America was held to be a land of opportunity, in which if you worked hard, you could set yourself up. And so that first generation, notice the one thing I didn't say, they did not come to North America so they could be better Jews. Right? What is true for most of American history is the good Jews stayed home. But the Jews who were willing to say, okay, that's all negotiable, they headed over. That first wave of Jews from Peter Stuyvesant's time, I think we drove him to an early death, right? From Peter Stuyvesant's time in the mid-1600s until the mid-1800s was a time of individual Jews making a difference. Chaim Solomon became a hero of kids' books, and Jews did things here and there, but it had no continuity. They did not establish institutions that lasted. Their children overwhelmingly successfully mingled and did not retain Jewish identity into the third generation. So, did they succeed or fail? What do you think? By their standards, they succeeded, right? They came to a place where they weren't going to get beaten up, where they could be accepted, where they wouldn't starve to death. Their kids are now Gentiles. That's success. It's not success if what you're measuring is continuity of Jewish identity, but that wasn't their priority. Right? So in what they set as their goal, they succeeded. We need to acknowledge that there are things worse than that. But in a sense, Jewish life in America starts twice. So that's the first revving up. And then the second revving up we owe to the Tsar, Alexander II, who decided there were too many Jews in the Pale of Settlement and permitted emigration. So at that point, the world's largest wave of Jews ever to move anywhere moved from the Pale of Settlement, which is basically Poland and Western Russia, to the United States. To this day, 80% of America's Jews are Ashkenazi, and most of us, the vast preponderance of us, who were born Jewish, come from that immigration that went from 1880 to 1920. In 1920, the Republican Party gained control of the federal government, and in those days was anti-immigration. I am going to say nothing political, so you can expect that from me. During that time, their agenda was somewhat different than those that had come before them. They came visibly identified as Jewish. And America, in addition to having a strong racist strain, was very anti-Semitic. Not as anti-Semitic as Europe, but the cartoons that were put in the Post were pretty horrific. And you can take a look at any of the editorials that were going on. There was a fear that the Jews would infiltrate and corrupt American culture, by which they mean Anglo-Saxon culture. Which, by the way, they were not wrong. Anyone who watches a sitcom and looks at how much Yiddish is in the sitcom knows that we have successfully infiltrated and corrupted. Those Jews' concern was to be able to live and earn an income and to Americanize. And so you start getting things like the Young Men's Hebrew Association. You start getting Yiddish newspapers like The Forward, based on your political affiliation, would determine what newspaper you subscribed to. You start getting Jewish Landsmannschaft, clubs based on where in the Jewish world you come from. So the Litvaks hung out together, the Russians hung out together. If you were German Jewish, then you had your own Reform temples, and you hoped to God that the Ostjuden, the Eastern Jews, would go somewhere else. Right? So Temple Emmanuel in New York was such a place where, if you look at the architecture, you can learn a lot about a shul by its architecture, what it aspires to be. Temple Emmanuel in New York does not look like a shul. It looks like a Moorish cathedral. That's on purpose, because they're hearkening back to a golden age in which Jews, Christian, and Muslims all built a culture together, a culture of science and poetry and enlightenment. P.S. that never existed in history, but the vision of it shaped American Reform architecture and aspiration for a generation. So at that point, you get Hebrew Union College, which is the Reform seminary. Slightly later on in this period, you get JTS, which is meant to be, the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, is originally not meant to be a conservative seminary. It was understood that HUC would be the seminary for all the liberal Jews, and JTS would be for all the conservative Jews, small c. It's just that at some point, a group of the Jews who were supposed to be at JTS said, no, you guys are too liberal also, so we're going to create Yeshiva University. And that's where you get the chocolate, vanilla, strawberry shape of American Jewish life, Orthodox conservative reform, right? But the original vision of JTS was they were meant to cover everything to the right of reform. And they succeeded in their goal too. Jews started to socialize with each other in Jewish clubs and things because that was the one place where they didn't have to feel Jewish, right? Gentiles thought we talk funny. We have funny Yiddish accents, we talk with our hands, we gesticulate, we're a little histrionic all the time. We think of that as normal. We think these guys don't have a pulse. But the only place where you could be normal and talk with your hands and carry on like normal people was at your Yiddish club, where everybody was normal. So the goal here was to start fighting our way into the general culture, to start resisting anti-Semitism. You get the creation of the ADL at this time, right? We are going to resist anti-Semitic intrusions, and we're going to work for the Americanization of Jews. Both HUC and JTS and YU did something never before done. They insisted that to be a rabbi, you had to have a bachelor's degree. Nobody ever insisted upon that. Chabad to this day doesn't insist on that. And they taught you both pastoral counseling and how to do this thing that never was taught in Jewish life. I am, among other things, a teacher of homiletics. Jews still don't know what homiletics is, right? A homily is a Christian sermon, right? And we wanted our rabbis to be able to give one. I demonstrated, I thought, a lovely homily earlier today. You'll notice that unlike a rabbinic drash, it had a point, it had a conclusion, it stuck to both of those and leavened it with humor. A homily. So we wanted Americans to know that our rabbis were clergy, which, by the way, is still anomalous in the Jewish world. When I was a rabbinical student, I was a summer chaplain at Sloan Kettering, which is a cancer hospital in New York. And I would walk into patients' rooms and I would say, "Hi, I'm Rabbi Artson." And if it was a black hat Jew, they would look at me like, "Who asked you to show up? I don't have a chicken you need to look at." Right? What do you want a rabbi for? Right? It was just the conservative and reform and secular Jews who knew why they wanted a rabbi, and that's because we are culturally Episcopalian. Right? So we wanted rabbis who could be on a panel with a priest and a minister and not embarrass us. And we got them. We got them. Right? But their kids had a very different agenda. The kids of those immigrants went to PS whatever. They moved out to Brooklyn and the Bronx, right? They started mingling with non-Jews, right? They were actual Americans. And so the agenda shifted. It was no longer the need of the Jewish community to make these people comfortable as Americans. The job of the Jewish organization now was to get Americans to accept them. And so we start going out into the world. We create the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee. We start creating these outward-looking groups that affirm a place in the larger American community, and we start fighting zoning restrictions. We intend to be able to move into whatever neighborhood we want to move into. My favorite example of that is that my mother grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. She was the only Jew she knew in Teaneck. She hated being a Jew in Teaneck. In December, every house had colored lights, she says, except for her dark, gloomy Jewish house. The minute she could move, she moved to San Francisco, which was as far away from Teaneck in every conceivable measurement you can imagine. Imagine her surprise when I told her that in the Great War of Teaneck, the Jews won. Let that be a warning to today's anti-Semites. Teaneck is coming for you. Right? But the goal was now different. Each generation, and we're going to come back to this when we get to our generation, each generation has to have the courage to modify the goals of the previous generation because they succeeded. That first generation created Jewish institutions by which they could Americanize. The second generation created Jewish institutions by which we could affirm our Jewishness, which meant that we moved from fighting to be Americans to now how do we get Jews who feel that they're more American than Jewish to feel Jewish? So we create summer camps. This is also at the same time, now end of World War II, the explosion of a new wave of Jewish immigrants and of Jews now fleeing into the suburbs. So it's at that point that buildings like this one get built. I know that that's true of this building because I saw the architecture on the outside and I see that sculpture there, right? You know the period it comes from. This is when Jews were inhabiting the suburbs and they needed to have suburban carpeted synagogues, right? And so we do. And they're incredibly successful at that, but at a price. Jews are now dispersed. Their kids are now going to the same schools that their Gentile neighbors are sending their kids to. They're often going to the same summer camps, same colleges, same professional programs, and that creates a very different pressure. The pressure is now, why bother staying Jewish? And so from our generation on, from the 70s on, the challenge is, how do we keep people Jewish? Without really knowing what that means either, because here's another thing that changed. The two biggest things I think that hit Jewish life was the '67 war and the Black Civil Rights Movement and the Women's Rights Movement. Up until the '67 war, there were a lot of American Jews who called themselves anti-Zionist. They believed that America was the promised land. They believed that we were no longer in exile. By the way, there's good evidence that American Jews still think that. We have the lowest aliyah rate of any Western country, right? And if we're honest, the only reason that Zionism picked up in the 20s was because the United States shut its doors. Most of the people who made aliyah in the first and second aliyah would have come to Brooklyn if they had a choice, but they didn't. So because the world shut its door on Jews, Israel became a center of Jewish life and ultimately the center of Jewish life, which is becoming right now in our time, and that raises its own challenges. But think about how, when you and I were kids, the center of Jewish life in my home was New York. And the symbol of Jewish life, we used to have platters that had bagels and lox on them. I don't mean the food, I mean patterns of bagels and lox, because that was the ultimate symbol of Jewish authenticity. And somewhere along the line in the Jewish gift shops, the bagels and lox plates disappeared and they were replaced by palm trees and pomegranates. Because Zion is now the center of Jewish life, not New York. But that shift was in our lifetime. So Jews became proud. I'll give you a for instance of that. European portraits of old Jews are of frail people huddling over a book, right? And their weakness is apparent. They're in the dark. There's a candle lighting the book. They're holding the book this close to their face, which, by the way, now that I'm 66, I do too. I understand that. But if you look at contemporary Jewish art, Jews developed a spine. Jews stand up, right? And that is a gift both of Zionism and Israel, where Jews were free to be out and public, And the second thing was the Black Civil Rights Movement and the Women's Rights Movement. Do you remember in the Olympics when there were 3 black athletes who won and they made the Black Power fist, right? An epoch-changing time, because if black people could wear African clothing and have natural hairstyles, well, we said, so can we. And it was at that point that I let my hair grow out to my shoulders. My then girlfriend, now wife, tells me that the first photograph I gave her of me, she had to cut to fit into the wallet. It was like all hair and the Cheshire Cat smile somewhere in the middle. Right? But we became public Jews. If you look at pictures of graduates of JTS as recent as the early 60s, nobody in the class photo is wearing a kippah. Not one. The professors at JTS would carry a kippah in their pocket, and they would go into the cafeteria, put the kippah on their head, say the bracha, put it in their pocket, eat the meal, say Birkat Hamazon, and then walk back out on the street. They would wear their kippah in class when they taught Talmud. To this day, now, there is not a conservative rabbinical school, male, female, or they, them, who doesn't walk around with a kippah all the time. That is not required by Jewish law, because this isn't about Jewish law. This is about identity. If black people can publicly embrace their identity, if women are now, in the immortal words of Marlo Thomas, free to be you and me, then we can too. And so we wear our Jewish publicly in ways that my grandparents never would have done. I remember the moment that came true to me. I was now an ordained rabbi. I was in Mission Viejo, which is deep suburbs in Southern California. We are in the shadow of Saddleback Church, which is the largest Protestant church in the world. And it's not a lot of us there. And I'm in Ralph's, which is the supermarket, and I'm shopping. And from the other side of Ralph's, there's a group of teenagers, one of whom from over there shouts at the top of his lungs, "Hey, Rabbi!" and comes running over. And I thought, when I was 13, I would have died sooner than shout out, "Hey, Rabbi," to my rabbi. I would have quietly walked over, I would have quietly said, and he would have died. He wouldn't have liked it either. But the teenager today doesn't know he has to hide. It doesn't occur to him that he has to hide. So our challenge becomes, how do we attract him? How do we get this person for whom it's not embarrassing to be Jewish? He's totally comfortable in his own skin. He just doesn't see why that has to involve him being part of a Jewish community. Right? And so here I want to say something Jews don't often think about. In America, the survival rate for a fourth-generation community is about 20%. French Americans, Scandinavian Americans, Italian Americans, Japanese Americans, their intermarriage rate is 80%. If you take that seriously, we're actually doing pretty good, right? We still have more Jews marrying Jews than not. We're the only ethnic group in the country where that's really true of white-identified ethnic groups. So I have a radical suggestion. I'm not going to predict the future. I have no idea what's coming. Fortunately, at 65, I'm only committed to the future for, say, the next 10 years, and then I'm going to retire, and it's someone else's problem. But I do think about the students I'm training and ordaining, and I want to make 2 suggestions for you to think about. The first is the survival of a meaningful Judaism has moved from the category of religion into the category of culture and identity. I want you to let that sink in for a minute. Most American Jews whether they identify religiously or not, say that being Jewish is either important or very important. 85% of them, which is astonishing. They don't see any reason to affiliate with the congregation, however. The LA Federation did a poll, 60 and over, 30 and under, measuring points of Jewish contact in the week. Who had more? 30 and under, 60 and over. 30 and under. They're listening to podcasts, they're reading online articles, they're downloading music, they're watching YouTube, they're participating in online debates, they're in a WhatsApp group. They had more points of contact in the week than their grandparents. Their grandparents were members of a synagogue they sporadically attended. So what we have to figure out is, in an age of absolute freedom, guilt isn't working. Nobody is being Jewish because of Bubby, right? That may be bad, that may be good, but they're not doing it out of guilt. They may because they love Bubby, and because they love being with Bubby, and everything Bubby does is Jewish, and it'll rub off on them. It is contagious, right? But it's not about guilt, and it is not about metaphysics, right? Even to the degree, I'll tell you a personal story. I don't think she'd mind my telling you. My daughter, Shira, who I adore, has a unique allergy. She is allergic to an open siddur. If her mother and I want to have a private conversation, all I have to do is take a Sim Shalom off the shelf, open it up, and she's gone. And yet my girl comes for every Friday night Shabbos dinner at the house. And if I say, can you lead Kiddush, she does it without a book. Because she went to Ramah, and she held the siddur under her armpit for 9 years, and apparently it absorbs. She bakes cookies for Simchas Torah to hand out in shul that she doesn't attend. And I found out 2 weeks ago, she actually prays to God. Not in a synagogue. And I will just share with you, because it's so cute, makes me so happy. Shira prays to God in the following way. She says out loud, with her atheist husband snorting beside her, she says, "Dear God." Then she says whatever she wants God to know, and she says, in closing, "I love you, Shira," just so God shouldn't confuse who it came from. You can't say that that girl isn't very Jewish. She's very Jewish. She just has no interest in synagogue. So the second thing I want to say is we need to stop defining ourselves by denominational label. It's just not true that you're conservative Jews. You're not. Right? If I were to write for you the salient list of what conservative Judaism teaches, there would be very few places you would put your initials next to. Right? But here's what is true. You love a conservative synagogue. And your synagogue is affiliated with a denomination. And rabbinical schools, many of them are affiliated with a denomination. But if Judaism is an identity, then what we are is Jews. And if you want to add Jews who are members of a conservative synagogue, fine. But we're just Jews, all of us. And then we pick among the institutions that we like. Some of us pick multiple institutions, incompatible institutions. Some of us like this institution for the learning, and that institution for the yoga and the cooking classes, and that trip for travel, and like we have a whole bunch of mixes, which is what a real civilization looks like. It turns out Kaplan was right. It also means, by the way, you can't leave this to the professionals. If Judaism is identity and belonging, then it's on all of us. And there are things that the professionals can help organize and put together and mobilize us with, but they're not the only actors in this game. And we have to be willing to step up as members of a people. In Israel today, most Israelis would define themselves as not religious. What they mean by not religious is not frum, not Orthodox, not black hat Orthodox. But here's the thing. The non-religious Israeli on an El Al flight, if asked, will put on tefillin. Right? My non-Israeli socialist uncles, they used to, on Shabbat, he lived in Tel Aviv. When I would stay with him, they would drive me to this really monstrosity. They had a saltwater pool 30 feet from the Mediterranean. You could see the Mediterranean from the pool. And the pool was filled with old Jews. So in terms of water quality, and we would swim in the pool, which was full of old Jews, so there was not a lot of laps going on. And then we would go back to the apartment, and they would have a Shabbat lunch, my secular aunt and uncle, and then he would read the Parsha with Rashi in the original, because he's Israeli, right? It had nothing to do with religion for him. It had to do with being a Jew. You don't want to be an ignoramus, right? And that is what American Jews are sidling into, except for the ignoramus part. The challenge is, for Jewish identity to be meaningful, it requires learning. The same way you raise your kids to know American culture. They learn American history, they learn American literature, and it becomes part of their bones. They don't have to agree with Tom Paine or Abe Lincoln, but they have to know what they wrote, they have to know what they stood for, they have to have read Walt Whitman. That's what being an informed American requires. So if Judaism is going to be a meaningful identity, rather than just go the way of French or Italian or Swiss identity in America, then we have to reclaim the content of our culture. We have to make Hebrew our business. We have to make studying Tanakh and Mishnah and Midrash and philosophy in the same way that you know great Western thinkers. You should know Rav Sadia and Rashi and Maimonides. Israel has produced a bevy of remarkable creators of fiction and poetry, among the world's best. You should read them. Because it is clear that in this country, cultural identity is not just any longer about the ways that it is compatible with American general culture, it's about the ways it's different. In America today, you have the right to be distinctive. In fact, that's what you contribute to the American mix. America, in my opinion, at its best, is a country that has created a system for people to have incompatible values and cultures, and yet not to bash each other over the head. We scream at each other, we yell at each other, we write articles calumniating each other, but we don't beat each other up. And that's the genius of democracy. But to be part of that democracy, we need to recognize and present Judaism as a world wisdom tradition, up there with any of the world's wisdom traditions. My life is made better in America by my Hindu neighbor who knows Hindu culture, because then I can borrow what's attractive to it. Those of you who do yoga, which originally was not done in sweatpants. Okay? Those of you who do yoga, those of you who meditate, You are already practicing borrowing from other cultures. There's a lot in Judaism the world should borrow. Shabbat is a brilliant thing. The way we celebrate teenagers right before we want to send them far away is a remarkable thing. Those of you who have young children, it's going to happen to yours too. We have so many, the way we have been fighting pharaohs for 3,000 years, the way we have been honoring the humanity in a sense of our animals and helping them to live lives of comfort and meaning. There are so many things Judaism has to teach the world, but if Jews don't have access to it, it will be lost. So the challenge and the opportunity for the future of Judaism, whose details I don't know any more than you do, is going to be, can we create Judaism in the mode of freedom? Not what you have to, but what you get to. Not what is expected of you, but what you expect of yourself. And that will produce multiple Judaisms, which has always been the case. And we will each bring our Judaism to the table, and we will each offer it to each other as an appetizer. And we will be better as a people and as a country if Jews join other peoples in being capable representatives of an ancient heritage that has been building resilient people for thousands of years in miserable circumstances. Those tools are desperately needed now, and not just by Jews. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
The question is how? How do we do that?
The question is, how do we do that? So, nobody knows for sure, me included. But I have a hunch that it requires each one of us making a commitment to deepen our Jewish involvement and knowledge. It means, and you can take it from a rabbi, preaching is the least effective means of education. So preaching to your children and grandchildren won't be any more effective than when people preach to you. But having them over for a meal at which Judaism is part of the joy, celebrating Judaism, letting them see that your Jewishness makes you stronger and more capable of thriving, showing them the beauty of our culture, giving them Jewish gifts. I don't mean just food and plates. I mean Jewish books, Jewish art, Jewish music, sending them to Jewish camps, getting them to be involved in Jewish living. Don't give up on the Jews who tell you that they don't want to be Jewish. Often what they mean by that is what they've seen doesn't speak to them. So show them something different. This is not the age of Wednesday night, we have a class, you all have to show up at 9 o'clock. This is the age of the iPad. People are used to listening to whatever they want to listen to when they want to listen to it. We have to create an iPad Judaism, right, that is available for people on their terms when they are ready for it. And we have to broaden our definition of community. Community is not this room. Community is these people. And wherever you gather to do Jewish, to be Jewish, that's the synagogue, not the building. So what if we think seriously about how do we help people have meetings to do Jewish and be Jewish? And what would that look like? Let's come up with 20 new ways to do that, right? That's what we can start doing, knowing that that may not be what works. But unless we have 100 experiments going on, we'll never land on the one that actually works. Yes?
So I believe that the research is saying that young service.
Mhm.
And so I think things that we're not used to are things that are grabbing our younger people. And I'm wondering, I think in your last answer, you alluded that you do feel that that is the way to go. That we really need to put our money into supporting those kinds of events because that's where kids are. They're doing these Shabbat dinners, and you could serve anything you want, and pizza, whatever. And they're paying them
So
to do that.
I have three thoughts on that subject. The idea is, what do we do to fund and to support where young Jews are, which often tends to be not the synagogue? I don't think it's a zero-sum game. So what I will tell you is, you should be funding rabbinical school. I say that not only as the dean of rabbinical school, but the difference between a dynamic Jewish institution and a moribund one is a visionary rabbi. So part of your charitable dollars should be supporting some rabbinical school. I think it should be Ziegler, but pick the one of your choice. Two, hold on, we're in the middle of this one. Two, you should certainly support the organizations that are successfully reaching young Jews. And that often means Moshe House, or a dinner thing, or a cultural group, or a dance club, or whatever. They're all vital and important, but all of them are going to reach a small fraction, right? They're not one or the other. And then the second thing is, if we raise Jews who are going to be increasingly interested in their Jewish identity, and here's the subversive part of what I said, that will eventually lead them to a synagogue. Because at the end of the day, the place that holds the lives of families is always going to be the synagogue. So don't stop supporting the synagogue. And also, by the way, don't stop supporting it because you guys deserve to have a rich Jewish life. Not just simply as the people who babysit grandchildren, but because you're human beings. Right? And we want to make sure that Jews are getting joy out of their Jewish life. That actually matters to the young Jews. That they see that it matters to you has an impact. So the final thing I will say is, we, us not born yesterday Jews, we need to start funding programs we don't attend. Because the reality is, if they walk in the door and see us in large numbers, they walk out. And you did that too when you were their age. So we have to be willing to fund the things we don't show up for if we want to give them a shot at stepping up in turn. So it's a mindset, but it's not zero sum. Keep funding a range of different Jewish avenues and institutions, including the congregation, because that will always be needed. It just won't be definitional the way it once was. In the 1950s and 60s, being affiliated meant, are you a member of a synagogue? But even then, it didn't mean, do you attend the synagogue? Do you understand the prayers? It just meant, do you write a check? Right? So there will always be synagogues at the center of American Jewish life. That's never going to change. But there's going to be a larger periphery of stuff that feeds the center, and the center in turn feeds the periphery. So we need to support it all. I want to look over here in case, yeah.
I need some help, and it sounds to me like perhaps you can help me with the way that I was trained about assimilation and the idea that assimilation was an enemy of my Judaism, and it really gives me a lot of pain. So what can you say about that?
One of my teachers,
Would you repeat that question?
yes, I have been taught that assimilation is the enemy of Jewish survival and that it's a source of great pain. Can you help me with that? I can. One of my teachers, the late Rabbi Dr. Gerson Cohen, who was the chancellor of JTS when I started and was a world-class scholar and giant, single-handedly responsible for JTS ordaining women. He wrote an article that got him in a lot of hot water called The Blessings of Assimilation. In it, he argued there are two kinds of assimilation. There's the assimilation that erases Jewish identity, that's bad. But there's the assimilation in which you take from the larger culture and you make it a part of Judaism. So, for example, in the period of the Golden Age of Spain, they were writing rhymed poetry. And we thought, hey, we could do that in Hebrew too. So all those beautiful Hebrew rhymed poems from the Middle Ages, Ibn Gabirol, Yehuda Halevi, all of that is assimilation. We didn't have that in our culture. And rabbis who get bachelor's degrees and can speak competently about science from the Bima, that's assimilation, right? My ancestors never wore this clothing. I look good, do I not? Right? My ancestors never had lapel pins either, you know, anti-Chelmnitsky pins, right? They also never took antibiotics. Like, there's no way not to assimilate. The Orthodox world is now doing bat mitzvahs and calling them bat Torah. But, you know, if it quacks like a duck. So, so the question is, do you assimilate in a way that strengthens your Jewish identity? Or do you assimilate in a way that dilutes it to the point of its non-existence? Jewish life will change. There is no way to prevent that. It always has, it always will. Right? Do you remember back in the day we used to print our books on parchment scrolls? You may have seen one recently. Right? But when Chaim Potok decided to print his books, he didn't do them by hand on parchment scrolls. He did them in what is known as a codex, which is flat sheets of paper stamped on one side. Right? We moved on. So the issue is not assimilate or don't assimilate. You're going to assimilate. The question is, can you make sure that your assimilations strengthen Jewish life? If we have, today, in the middle of services, the rabbi had us meditate and breathe. Wasn't that nice? You think that the Lubavitcher Rebbe told his people in Lubavitch back in the day, all right, now we're all going to do breathe in through the mouth and out through the nose or whatever? Like, no, that's assimilation. So be not afraid, my son. Someone in the back? Yes.
I don't know if you can address this, but there's a new movement of a lot of the millennials, anti-Zionism. Can you explain that?
A lot of the millennials are anti-Zionists. Yes. In the professional business, that kind of question is known as, Rabbi, I've pulled the pin from this hand grenade. Would you mind holding it? And yet you look so friendly and innocent. So I will answer the question, and then I'm going to go fly home, and nice knowing you. Many of your grandparents were anti-Zionist. Every one of you who have Bundist grandparents had grandparents or parents who said, I'm not a Zionist. Right? And they all chose to come here, when many of them could have gone there. So I just want to say that the non-Zionism and the anti-Zionism of some of our kids and our kids' kids, in some ways is just picking up where things started. 2, I want to say, because I want to be very clear on this subject, I am a Zionist, which I define as follows. A Zionist is a person who affirms the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination in our homeland. That's a sentence worth memorizing. I affirm the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination in our homeland. That makes me a Zionist, and that makes anyone who believes that a Zionist too, which means that several of my students who say they're non-Zionist, I don't know if anyone says anti-Zionist, but they say they're non-Zionist, I say to them, do you support the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination in our homeland? And they say, of course. Okay, fine. Call yourself what you want. But there are two things that make that hard for some people. Well, three. One, by the way, one of my three answers will offend everyone in the room, so if you like the first one, hold on. Save your applause until the end. The first is that Israel has not always been behaving like the most sensitive social democracy in the world. And some of Israel's policy and military choices and public statements are alien to Enlightenment American values. You may defend it anyway, but you have to admit it. Israel has the most right-wing government it's ever had. And there are people on that government who say overtly racist and violent things about their neighbors. We raised our kids to be anti-racist. And they didn't know that there was an Israel exemption for that. So some of them define themselves as anti-Israel for that reason. Some of them have been caught up in the general anti-Semitism of Western culture. One of the ways I try to have this conversation productively with people is I say to them, I want you to say the same thing you just said about Israel, but I want you to substitute any other country in the world for that sentence. Would you be prepared to say, I hate some of the things America has done, and therefore we should get rid of it? Would you be prepared to say, there is no good American, they all should be wiped out? If you would, then I have a different problem, but at least you're not an anti-Semite. But the thing is, it sounds reasonable to a lot of Americans to debate should there be an Israel or not. I often will have this conversation by saying, you know, I want to talk about a country that was founded in 1948 based on a mandatory population exchange, and it's been in a state of some tension and violence ever since, and I want to know if you think that Pakistan has the right to exist. Nobody says Pakistan shouldn't exist. How about India? You think India has a right to exist? Like, they were both mandates of the UN. They both exchanged populations in the millions, right? Does anybody talk about those two countries who just stop as if we know what that would look like? So if you're not prepared to talk that way about any other country, then I think you're batshit crazy, and I think you're a bigot. But you're not a bigot on your own. You had 2,000 years of Western training to teach you that it's okay to expect completely unrealistic things of Jews and to demonize us in ways you wouldn't with any other group. Do any of us think that the presidents of universities would have had any trouble defining that behavior was off limits if it had been the KKK marching through Harvard Square? No way. So that's reason number two. Reason number three is American Jews have internalized a profound ambivalence about their Jewish identity. And all three of those are live reasons. But I want to lay a fourth one on the table. This is the one that if you liked what I've said so far, this one will be the one that gets you. We've also presented to our kids unofficially there's only one way to be a Zionist. One of my favorite cartoons in The New Yorker showed Moses and the children of Israel marching through the sea, and one Israelite turns to the other and says, you know, he's pretty good, I just wish he were more pro-Israel. And we laugh at that, but I can't tell you the number of parents who call me who belong to pretty right-wing synagogues, whose understanding of Zionism is AIPAC and BB Zionism, and they got a kid who's in Jewish Voices for Peace or some such, and they've gone crazy. And I do at some point try to say to them, maybe you should have introduced them to progressive Zionists. Like my friends in Israel are marching against the occupation, and they are marching against Bibi, and they're doing it because they love Israel. And you may think they're wrong. You have every right to not like them any more than you like American progressives. That's your business. But Israeli progressives don't think Israel isn't their home. It's because it's that their home, they're not going to hand it over to the right wing. But American Jews don't know about those people. We don't highlight them. We don't talk about them. They don't speak at AIPAC conferences, right? And as a result, American kids are given the choice. To be a Zionist is to be pro-Netanyahu, pro-occupation, and if you're not a Zionist. And then they say, okay, I'm not a Zionist. So maybe what we also need to do, in addition to educating them about the reality of Israel and the fact that there are people who really want to kill us, so we need a place of our own, is to also educate them that Israel being a vibrant democracy means there are many, many incompatible ways to be a good Israeli. And if that's true, then there are many, many ways to be a Zionist. And we need to give them permission to do that.
I'd like to pick up what you said about kids. I can't be sure that my great-grandchildren will be Jewish. But I think Chabad is really terrific on campus. And my grandchildren are learning more from Chabad than they did in Hebrew school. Because they're in college.
Yeah, of course.
So if you want to contribute to something, Chabad is the way to go. And I'm not really. Chabad is the way to go. It seems to me.
That's fine. Here's what I want to say. We need all the tools available. And Chabad, for many people, is such a tool. The amazing thing about Chabad is that college kids get involved in it without any intention of becoming Chabad, which I imagine must be somewhat frustrating to Chabad. Right? The kids that I know participate in it because the place is really friendly. It will serve them alcohol, and it serves them a meal. Why are we not doing that? Like, we also can, I mean, not the alcohol part, but we also can be having lots of delicious dinners and opening our homes to people. I have said for 20 years, my colleague has probably heard me at some RA conventions say this, every conservative rabbi should be organizing, I was so pleased to see that you are, organizing Shabbos dinners at people's homes. Anyone who walks into this building on a Shabbat should walk out with an invitation to a meal from a congregant. Right? That's what Chabad does. If we did that, if there was anyone who walked into this building could not walk out without multiple invitations to a meal. Okay, you can't do it today, how about next Saturday? It would change the face of the synagogue. Right? So yeah, Chabad does a lot right. And I say that from a place of privilege. I could lead Birkat HaMazon at Chabad. So can your grandson. But you have to be willing to live in a place of privilege where others are excluded. I'm not. So while there's much that's wonderful about Chabad, it can't be my home because of the talk I gave this morning and the need to be in a place where everyone is welcome as they are. But that there's Chabad and that Chabad is doing something vibrant and vital, 100%. That's, yeah, you.
So, kind of attaching myself to that, not the Chabad path, but I will say, having been brought up in Hebrew school, I was a chutznik, I was Reformed, and the reason we became
You were ahead of your time.
The synagogue was not going to allow that. And now I'm back.
Welcome back.
But my biggest concern is that I think there's a real shortcoming in Jewish Hebrew school, religious education for our students in the synagogue. We don't do enough about Israel. We don't teach about differences like your son and mine. We need to broaden our education so that our kids are comfortable coming to the synagogue. My son, I had an experience like yours. Well, he told me, he was at his grandmother's funeral last year. He said, the next time I walk into a synagogue is at yours. Because he was brought up in a synagogue that did not accept him.
Right. So, look, it's not reducible to a single agenda, but let's admit that the idea of imposing an education to prepare people to read from a book in a foreign language they don't speak when they are hormonally at their most imbalanced after a full day of school is a difficult assignment in the best of circumstances. And it's never worked well. If you read people writing about Hebrew supplementary school in the 1920s, they were bemoaning it then. And we've done something ridiculous, which is what you all resented as teenagers, you now impose on your own teenagers, with the hope that someday they will impose it on theirs. Perhaps what we need to do is rethink the whole mission. And personally, I think there's no reason why the program we run in the afternoon has to be modeled on school. It also doesn't have to be kidnapped by bar mitzvah preparation. That could be its own thing. But if we had like an afternoon youth group, like Israel has Scouts, and they got to deepen their Jewish identity in ways that are fun and social, maybe that would have a better shot than we're going to sit in a classroom in which we're not going to grade you, so you know it doesn't count. And then some poor Israeli is going to have to discipline a bunch of American preteens. Like, really, what in the previous life did that poor woman do? So I think it's about trying to radically rethink what it is we do with them during those years. But the other thing I want to offer you is get them involved in a youth group when they're teenagers. Make it social and make it their group. Get them to Camp Ramah or some other camp where they teach a positive Jewish identity. Ramah saved my daughter, and it delivered her to a Jewish high school, which also was an amazing place for her. But the more we can make it part of their own social network, the more we'll have a shot at it. And then the goal is to deliver them to one a staff Jewish camp, because the secret reality is that Jewish summer camps are for the staff, not the campers. Right? The staff is now old enough to be able to appreciate and to grow Jewishly on their own terms. I don't want to take too much time. So, Rabbi, how are we doing?
One or two more? One more.
All right. So we got two more right there. Go ahead.
Talking about enriching the simulation, education, etc. My question is vis-a-vis what's going on right now in present time on campuses. And there is a reaction toward hatred, etc. of people who care about Jewish education, maybe to send their students, their age college students, to Jewish university or Jewish institution. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts about it, vis-a-vis enriching the assimilation? And all the ways you were talking about, I'm not asking you to guess the future, but there is a kind of trend now.
I think the more The question is, what can we do to strengthen Jewish engagement and education among college students today? There are a host of Jewish programs out there that are trying to do that, and they all deserve support. At AJU in LA, we have a program called Brandeis Collegiate Institute, where we take kids. We own the largest parcel of Jewish real estate outside the land of Israel. It's about 2,000 acres in Simi Valley of natural, undeveloped land, and we do an intensive summer program of Jewish and Israeli culture. And we take college kids from all over the country and all over the world. There are other similar programs out there. Those are all great. And there aren't enough Jewish colleges to educate people. So I also, as an American Jew, am unwilling to give up on the general colleges. What I would like to do is continue to insist that the colleges enforce the rules that are already on the book and that they make their campuses a safe place for Jews and other living things.
So I want to ask it the other way. We're talking about here assimilation where Jewish people are exposed to other cultures, faiths, ideas. To what degree does the future of Judaism and Jewish faith in this country rely on getting those other cultures to understand what we do and have programming and things where it's ecumenical? Is that a value? Is it helpful?
I'm a big believer in sitting at the table with anyone who will sit at the table and having conversations with anyone else. I'll tell you something else I've learned from Jacob, my son, which is it's a waste of time to sit at the table with someone who doesn't want to be at the table. So people who only want to talk to me to convince me not to be Jewish or to change my Jewishness, I have no patience for that and no need for that. But if you're willing to meet me, then I'd like to get to know you and I'd like to know your faith and your culture. There's what we can learn from each other. The other thing I just need to remind you, I come from a place where we fill the fantasy of the world, right? We in Los Angeles will shape your conversations, your thoughts, and your entertainment for the next foreseeable decade or so, as we have for the last 5 or 6. And the anti-Semites are not wrong to notice the strong Jewish flavor of the ways we influence the culture. Anyone who watched Seinfeld, the Gilmore Girls, did you ever watch and think how often they quoted Yiddish? Like there wasn't a Jew in the show, and there was Yiddish in every episode, which I will tell you, in real Connecticut, that doesn't happen. Right? But Jewish movies and entertainment are full of Jewish characters and Jewish culture. So I don't think it's just interfaith stuff. I think it's helped labeling for people that's Jewish, right? American politicians, when they speak to Gentile audiences, talk about Tikkun Olam. Like, do you realize what a coup that is? You know, I'm glad we trademarked social justice because, you know, that's going to produce a good income someday soon, right? So I think we are doing that actually very effectively. One example, I mean, in California until recently, we had 2 senators, both of whom were Jewish women, and nobody noticed. Like, that's amazing. No one even noticed it. The thing that linked Biden and Trump, what they shared in common, in addition to a Jewish chief of staff, was they both had Jewish grandchildren, right? Joe Biden is standing outside the White House in December to pick up little blonde Bidenlet, and the kid shows up to be with Grandma and Grandpa wearing his Maccabee PJs. Right? And that picture is in every newspaper in America, and there isn't a comment on it. It's just the Bidens and their grandson. It's like, are you kidding? Like, it's the Bidens and their Jewish grandson wearing Maccabee pajamas. You don't think in 1880 that would have been the headline? Right? So we're actually doing a pretty good job of being part of mainstream American culture. And so the last thing I just want to leave you with, would you please take a breath? Stop panicking. This is not 1936. This is not Berlin. You would much rather today, right now, be a Jew in America than an anti-Semite. When someone assaults the Jewish community, 1,000 phones ring, and every senator and this White House pick up the phone, just as in the last administration, every senator, congressperson, or White House occupant picked up the phone. We have direct access on a level that Jewish communities never in history had. So, do we need to take it seriously? We do. Do we need to be responsive? Absolutely. Do we need to fight smart? We do. Do not panic, and do not listen to their rhetoric, because it is much more powerful to be us than to be them.